Good morning and happy Sabbath. Thank you again for that song. It was beautiful. I'm always blessed by the service, whether it's the song service, whether it's the Sabbath school lesson, or special music, or the organist or the pianist who plays. I love to thank, or the people who are singing. It's always a great blessing to hear each person and to have each person lift up their voice. My message today is working with God. Okay. Have you ever driven down to Cumberland from here? Have you ever gone through Tracy City and taken the winding roads through the plateau? Have you ever enjoyed it on a nice wintry day? Maybe it's cold out, maybe it's 32. But you've gone on, I think it's 56, and then you turn on to 41A. And then as you continue to head down, you pass through Monteagle and then Swanee, just before you head down the mountain. Well, there's a beautiful place I've seen multiple times, and it's covered in frost and in snow. It's beautiful. I've always wanted to go there, and every so often I ask people, have you seen this place? How do you get there? But always in the back of my mind, I have this nagging kind of suspicion, kind of fear, or kind of trepidation. There's a fence around it, and there's a gate before you can get in there. So I've always tried to figure out, and I continue to ask people, what's the problem, or how can I get in there, and how can I check out this place? Until I finally came upon a person who let me know it's a water reclamation site. The source of all that beautiful, of that winter wonderland, of all those icicles that cover the trees, top to bottom, front and back, head to toe, is basically sewage. The source for all that beauty is something that you would not want to get near, you would not want to drink from, you would not want to be a part of. This begins my question to you today. What is the source of your beliefs? What is the source of why you do things? What is it that brings you or you go to over and over again that make you who you are? Now remember, Israel said, all the things the Lord has said, we will do. This is a picture of the winter wonderland. But even Israel said multiple times, all the things that the Lord has said, we will do. And yet over and over, they take a small step and another small step until they were not on the path that the Lord intended them to be on. At times we think our source is right because it's our source. But the reality is the Bible and God tells us multiple times to check our source. Now there are 3 different places where He reminds us to check our sources. The first is 1 Samuel 16, the second is 2 Corinthians 13, and the last is 1 Peter. But if we begin in 1 Samuel chapter 16, we come into a story where Samuel is actually getting ready to choose, and he's trying to figure out who God has inspired to be the next king. And he knows it's one of the sons of Jesse, but he doesn't know which one. So he's going through one son after another, and he keeps on looking at each one, and he keeps on seeing, oh, this guy looks really good. I think it's going to be him. I think this one's going to be good. And each time the Lord says, nope, 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 until he gets to this one statement. The Lord says, do not consider his appearance, for his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. This is very comforting that the Lord sees a source that we don't, and it's one of the greatest reasons why we need to go back to the source. 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 5 says, examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Or do you not realize about yourself, that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you fail to meet the test? So Paul, writing to the Corinthians, wants them and reminds them to check their source, reminds them to go back and to make sure that they are not just going after their own ideals or their own interests, but to go back to Jesus Christ. That is the source that is within you. Last but not least, 1 Peter chapter 3. It says, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always, being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect." Now, the beauty of this verse is it doesn't say it on the surface, but the concept is definitely there. To mount a defense, to build anything, you have to have resources. You have to have prepared and gathered resources long ago, and now, like an accountant reconciling, you have to begin with something that you're in common with them about. And then you build, and then you build, and then you build until you finally get to the point that you're trying to make with them. But he says that you need to build a defense. So you have to prepare ahead of time. Church, is it clear that you need to check your sources? Do you see that the Bible writers call each and every one of us to check our sources, to self-evaluate? That this is not some easy checklist of no importance, but actually this error came in at the beginning. If you look back at Genesis, there was a question put to Eve. She didn't go back to her source. She didn't go back to Adam. She tried to figure it out on her own. If she had gone back to her source, our future or our time now would have been very different. Now, there's pretty interesting concepts when you come to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The name alone kind of screams basic ideals or concepts. The first one is the seventh-day Sabbath. The second one is the soon coming of Jesus. Now, sometimes the latter can be preached so often and with such intensity or passion that the shortness of time can become the incentive for seeking righteousness. Now, is that the shortness of time the reason why we seek after Jesus? Or is there something more interesting? One of our founders, Ellen White, wrote about this because this was becoming a problem back in her time, and it can still be our problem today. And she writes that the shortness of time is frequently urged as an incentive for seeking righteousness and making Christ our friend. This should not be the great motive with us, for it savors of selfishness. We have great concepts, great ideals, and our name is not wrong. But, like the children of Israel, if you continue to make a small step over and over, you'll find yourself not on the path that you started in on, but the path where you're not supposed to be. Has your source for getting right, coming to Jesus, been the shortness of time? If it has been your source, what should be? It's time to reevaluate and ask yourself what should be the source and where is the true urgency. And now we're going to look at 4 biblical points of urgency in the Bible, because I believe urgency is there, and we all need to recognize that it is there, but we also have to recognize what is the source of this urgency. Now, Joshua calls for urgency in getting right with God. He says when he calls all of Israel together, he says, "But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." This happens again in 1 Kings. Elijah, when there was a 3-year period of no rain, he then calls all the people together, the prophets of Baal on one side going to offer, and him on the other side to offer before each one of their gods. And this is what he says to them. He says, "How long will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him." There's another point in Psalms 95, 7 through 9. It's interesting, it says, "For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under our care." Now that's heartwarming just in and of itself, to know who God is and where he wants to be with you. But then he goes on to say, "Today, if you would hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, or you did that day at Massah, in the wilderness where your ancestors tested me." The urgency is in the call and in the immediacy of receiving that call, but not hardening your hearts. The last one is in 2 Corinthians 6:1-2. Paul writes, as God's co-workers, we urge you not to receive God's grace in vain. For he says, in the time of my favor I heard you, and in the day of salvation I helped you. I tell you, now is the time of God's favor, and now is the day of salvation. You can see that this urgency is tied to salvation. And what's interesting about this is when you look at a biblical timeline, and I don't know how well it shows up for all of you, I can see it fine, but I also know it's kind of small. But there are time frames for each one of these people that I've mentioned. Joshua, 1468 BC to 1358 was his lifespan. Elijah was 904 to 850, and Paul was 14 to 67. And each one of these people predated the second coming. Number of them predated the first coming, and yet there's an urgent matter they're trying to get across to each one of us, and it's to make decisions today. I hope that you see the gospel urgency that is rooted in something more fundamental than the nearness of Jesus coming. I'm not here to diminish the urgency. I'm here to turn it up. But to turn it up, you have to ask yourself some basic questions. What makes you you? What are you comprised of? Do you have skills? Do you have talents? Do you have a car, a cell phone? Do you have a home? Any one of these things does not come by instantaneous, even the lottery doesn't come instantaneous. Each one of us has had to make decisions in the past that have made us who we are today. And the decisions we make today will make up who we are tomorrow. And the same for the next day, until we come to tests and different problems that the Lord wants us to overcome. The intensity of the gospel writers is in us getting right with God, but it's in us making choices so that we are ready for the future things. Now, I don't have slides on this, but in 2 John 1:8, it says, watch out that you do not lose what you have worked for, that you may be rewarded fully. So John's talking about you currently having something that you've worked for, but he's looking toward a future, and he's saying, watch out and don't lose what you have today. 2 Peter 3:17, therefore, dear friends, since you have been forewarned, that's warned in the past, be on your guard so that you may not be carried away by the error of the lawless and fall from your secure position today. 2 Timothy 3:14 also shares this same concept. He says, but as for you, continue, meaning future, in what you have learned present, that you have been convinced of currently, because you know those from which you have learned it, from your source. Each one of these people in the Bible is talking about this same concept. The choices you make in the past have made you who you are today. Sometimes we can look at other people, or we can look at our own lives, and we can say, I could have been, I should have been, I didn't do. But the reality is, each one of these choices have been made in the past, and they make us who we are now. But God wants to make us who we will be in the future, and he wants to prepare us. And I'm about to go over two different stories that talk about people who go through changes and have followed the Lord, and it's beautiful when we grab hold of the right source and we make the choices to follow the Lord so that we are prepared for the future. And that is what the Lord wants for us. The first one is in 1 Samuel 17:34-37. If you want to turn there, 1 Samuel 17. It's a very fun story. I love to read about David. There's a number of different things that are going on here. First, there is an assumption about his past, and he's going to talk about that. But he's currently in He's left his job and he's gone to where the army of the Lord is, where Saul's army is, and he's seen this Philistine, and the Philistine is doing things and saying things about God's people and God's army that are hurtful and shameful and taunting them, and he sees all of this and he gets riled. He gets upset because he's not coming after just people, he's coming after the Lord. And David, when he sees the king, tells the king about his past. And this is how David describes his past. He says, "Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear." Now that's awesome. I've not killed a lion. I've not killed a bear. That is a man, or that is a very strong man. But then he compares it to this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. So he refers to the army, Saul's army, as the army of the living God. "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine." He gives all glory. All of the source of David's strength is in God. Do you see that? That is the source. That is his history. That is what he's learned. Now, later on, and he overcomes Goliath. You can go back and read the story, but later on, so the shepherding and the lessons and the way that David walked with the Lord when he was a youth and as he was growing up prepared him to face Goliath. And Goliath prepared him to face this next test he was up against. In 1 Samuel 19, it talks about a time where Saul goes to kill David. So first, David learns how to kill. He learns how to depend upon God. Now he's being attacked. He's trying to be killed. And David's response twice, not just once, but twice, he could have killed Saul. But first in 1 Samuel 24, and then again in 1 Samuel 26, he refuses to kill Saul. Each one of these trials comes up in our lives, and each step we take with the Lord is there just so that we can go after the next thing that God has and knows is going to be in our life. The next story, not so positive, is about Moses, another shepherd. He wasn't a shepherd at first, but when you read the story about Moses, there's two places. First one, at least two places. The first one is in Exodus. The second one is in Acts when Stephen is recounting to the Pharisees all the things of their past. And one of the things he brings out was Moses. And he says in Acts 7:22, Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. You can pause right there. Where is his source? It's in Egypt. He saw one of them, and so when he gets his trial, in verse 24, it says, he saw one of them, meaning the children of Israel, being mistreated by an Egyptian. So he used his source. He went to the defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptian. That was his response to the problems. He used his source, and he attacked and he killed. And his source did not defend him. He had to run for the next 40 years. He had to run away from Egypt until God got a hold of him, and he worked with him. And then when he comes back to his next challenge, which was at the age of 80, Exodus chapter 3, verses 11 says, when God came to Moses in the burning bush, Moses' response is completely different. Instead of just jumping and defending and attacking and killing, to deliver his people, Moses has a completely different perspective because his source is completely different. It's not the Egyptians anymore, it's God. And his response is, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And he does. From then on, he's following God. He makes mistakes, but still, his source is still God. And he overcomes. Ellen White once again makes a very simple statement to this whole effect of what God is trying to do with us. And she says very simply, Character building is the most important work ever entrusted to human beings, and never before was its diligent study so important as now. Do you agree with that? Never was any previous generation called to meet issues so momentous. Do you agree with that? Never were there young men and young women confronted with perils so great as to confront them today. Now, if the younger generation has it harder than you, should you be able to teach them? Should you have gone through some of these things? Should you have a source that you can hand over to them, tools that you can hand over to them, experiences, different things that you can give to them so that they can progress even greater than you? Is it clear that there's an urgency in the Bible and that the gospel is for you to choose this day to make a change? And that the hope is that you begin this process of character building so that you can, one day with God, be ready to face the challenges God has for you in the future. Now, there's a class I've been taking at work, and it's super fun, super exciting, and there are 3 things that I learned in this last week's reading that I'd never heard before in my life. I maybe knew somewhat intuitively, I maybe had an inkling of some of these things, but each one independently I felt was important. The 3, when you put them together, I think is momentously important. And it's kind of in dealing with one another or in leading others. The first one is everybody at work has some interest in becoming and having a purpose. And every person wants to feel like their life matters. When you put that into your interactions with one another, when you put that into interactions with your own family, and don't think of them as being against you or having some sort of, call it beef with you, but you realize that they actually want to matter in this world, does it change how you deal with them? The second thing was when people feel rebuffed or left out, the brain activates a site registering that's the same as registering physical pain. Have you ever heard about that? You don't have to hit somebody, you don't have to kick somebody, you don't have to push them down. All you have to do is rebuff them or leave them out. People actually remember downbeat comments far more often and in greater detail and with more intensity than they do encouraging words. Now, I'm not saying this means that you have to put, as the Bible writers say it, old wine into new wineskins or give the devil keys to the kingdom of heaven. There was a reason why the devil was kicked out of heaven. Even Jesus said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." And Jesus once said to a group of Pharisees, you are of your father, the devil. But there is value in knowing that people want purpose to their existence and that we should try to keep and to heap encouraging words on people when we can. Now, I want to leave you with this last thought, and it's the scripture for the sermon. It's found in Daniel 12, and if you want to turn there, that's our last place to go. A prophecy at the end of time is the heading for mine. And it starts off in Daniel 12, and I'll get to verse 3 when you get there. But it starts off with, "At that time Michael shall stand up, and the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people." And it's just a beautiful perspective of where God is and what he's doing on our behalf. But he goes on to say in verse 3, "Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forevermore." Have you ever seen the stars? Up here, I'll bet you see them better than any other place. It's so cool when you do get to see them. And it's such a beautiful, incredible scene if you get to see the stars shine. Now, God is trying to get us to understand this perspective trying to get us to comprehend two things. One, that the wise are going to shine like the stars. But number two, those who lead many to righteousness are like the stars. Another way to say it is, in the wake of each person's decisions, strands of history are set in motion that otherwise would never unfold. The shape of reality itself has been and is being incrementally configured by the wondrous outworking of your will, my will, and each other's will in conjunction, and the interplay between them all. What you do matters, either positive or negative, and that would otherwise not exist. Each deed you execute triggers a series of outcomes for which you are the solitary source. Your life truly matters. But the question is, what is your source? Are you connected to God? Number two, are you always diligently checking that source? And when you see that source, will you make a decision to follow Him today? Once you make that decision for following Him today, do you realize that He has in store for you not just a kind of a lazy river of life? He wants you to go out and to search and to seek those who are lost in a dying world. He knows what you will face. He's preparing you for a work. He doesn't want you to fail and fall like Moses at age 40, or to sit complacent like David when he sinned and he looked out over the kingdom. Today, if you hear His voice, do not harden your heart. Please. Will you open your hymnals and sing our closing song, Jesus Paid It All, number 184.